Did you watch last night's Rockets-Celtics game where the Rockets won 114-112? If you came away from that game not thinking Thompson is a star, I don't know what to tell you. Plus, we're going to take a look at the latest in the Texans offensive coordinator search. There's a candidate that they have just interviewed that really should excite you, but this story that I heard about offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik, weirdly, not even the craziest story about him that I've heard this week, has me thinking there is a very clear frontrunner for who the Texans should be throwing all their money at to hire as offensive coordinator. And yeah, the Astros officially moved on from Ryan Presley. They have officially freed up some cap space, but they're going to use that money to get this guy. Let's talk about all of it. It's Gallant Says.
A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
Paul Gallant's wondering the same things a lot of people wonder.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
Do you feel there's been a consistent theme with the interceptions?
I think every interception really has a different story.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to say.
Grow up, mother. You kidding me? Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
Hello, and welcome aboard the Gallant Says podcast live at youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant Says, on Twitter or X at Gallant Says, Instagram at Sports Gallant, and facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. You can catch it Monday to Friday, weekdays around 4 Central Time, and occasionally after major Houston sporting events. You can also get it wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud. I'm still on the come down from last night's incredible Rockets-Celtics game. If you don't know me, you might be unaware of the fact that I'm actually a Boston Celtics fan. I grew up in Boston. The first ever game that I went to for any sport ever, it was a February of 1996 game, I think, between the Celtics and the then Charlotte Hornets. And before that game, I met this guy. That's Larry Bird, and a very small Paul Gallant, in case you're watching along on the stream. You gonna scream and cheer? He asked me after my dad approached him at a bar/restaurant and asked, "Hey, my son's just watched a VHS tape of all of your highlights. He's a sports nerd. You want to talk to him for a little bit?" He was so nice. So I grew up a Celtics fan and a Patriots fan, Boston sports fan, blah, blah, blah. But watching last night's Rockets-Celtics game, I got to admit, I had a lot of envy for Rockets fans because you're getting to see something take form where you've got nothing to lose this year. But every single game you watch, you are going to be in this sort of honeymoon phase with a Rockets team that just plays incredibly hard, flies around defensively, and they are led by Thompson. I don't think there's any debate about this. I think that Thompson has the highest ceiling amongst all Rockets players. Yes, over Jalen Green. Yes, over Alperen Şengün. And given what he has done in the last 3 to 4 weeks since replacing Jabari Smith in the starting lineup, how can you say he's anything but a star? Oh, Paul, a little premature for a guy who's only in his second year. Well, just look at what he has done since becoming a starter right after the Rockets lost that game to the Celtics. Since his time taking over for Jabari Smith, basically going back to January 5th, here are his numbers. 23-16 against the Lakers, 20-15 against Washington. Maybe not the best game against the Memphis Grizzlies, But then 19-13 against Memphis on January 13th. Not the best statistical performance against the Denver Nuggets, but 20-10 in that back and forth game that was on TNT against the Kings. Sure, they lost to the Detroit Pistons, and maybe he didn't do that much. Oh, wait, he had 16-16 against the Cavaliers. But his last two games, he had a triple-double over the Cavaliers on Saturday. Mind you, this is the arguably best team in basketball, at least based off of their record. And then they beat the NBA champion Celtics last night. And that entire game, 33 points, 9 boards, 4 assists, a block, a steal, holding Jason Tatum to 0 points in the first half. Did he not look like the best player on the court? And I think he is the best player on the court for the Rockets. I don't think I've ever seen somebody as tall as Amen Thompson with the amount of speed and agility and also just give a fuck that this guy has. He flies up and down the court, all in on defense. Always around the rim on offense, whether it's for the alley-oop that he had early on in the game or the 2 clutch shots that he had in the lane against the Celtics to ultimately win the game, including the last second shot that he hit. Impeccable touch on those. He looked better than Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown for large stretches of last night's game. And this is a guy who was doing this in just his second year. I do not know where he ranks among NBA players, but he is a star. And I say that confidently because tell me how many players you watch on a night-to-night basis that do the things he is capable of doing. I think he's the best athlete, perhaps, in the league. He's so fast. He does those things on offense that I mentioned where he actually is pretty good on the inside considering he's 6'6". But that play that he had where he tracks down Drew Holiday, blocks a shot, catches it in midair, and then fires an outlet pass to get the Rockets going the other way in transition, and then ends up underneath the basket like 5 seconds later. How many guys in the league can do that? Very few. The guy's a star. Everybody who is watching Amen Thompson, we're not just talking pundits and blabbers like me. We're talking ex-NBA players. They are watching this guy, and their jaws hitting the fucking floor. Auga! Watch this guy, if you haven't already. This is something truly special. And it was a couple of weeks ago after one of his first really good games where I thought to myself, this is a foundational piece for Ime Udoka. He is the perfect blueprint for Ime Udoka to point at in film sessions and say, this is who I want you guys to be. Perfect guy for that, right? But now he is on the road against the defending champions in a hostile environment, looking like the best player on the court and looking more confident than even Jason fucking Tatum out there. And he did that for 42 minutes last night. The final stat line, 13 of 19 from the field. He hit a three-pointer, 6 of 8 from the free throw line, 9 boards, 4 assists, a block, a steal. And envy from me, a Celtics fan who is still basking in the afterglow of a championship from a few months ago, thinking to myself, damn, Rockets fans get to root for this guy. I'm blown away by how good he has been since joining the starting lineup. And, I mean, you're allowed to start having crazy talk with yourself about what the ceiling is for the Rockets this year. Take a look at the rest of the Western Conference and just think about the way that it played out last year, where everyone was on Minnesota and Anthony Edwards, but then they looked kind of shitty against the Mavericks in the Western Conference Finals, and Anthony Edwards looked winded. Sure, the Oklahoma City Thunder are probably the number one team, not just for this year, but also going forward with all the draft picks that they have. And they lead the Rockets by 6 games for the best record in the Western Conference. But Denver is relying on Nikola Jokic to score basically 36 points a game. The Timberwolves are not playing up to the standard that they did last year. The Mavericks right now are the 9 seed in the West. It's Memphis with Ja Morant, who you're 3-0 against this year. The Lakers, you look at this West, is it that crazy to think that they could do some damage? That they could get to the 3rd round? I don't. And I feel weird talking about it because generally I've been cynical and skeptical about more than any team in town, the Rockets. And right now, here I am wearing a Houston Rockets shirt, the old logo. The day after they beat my favorite basketball team. I love what I'm watching. I think Ime Udoka is an incredible coach. But Amen Thompson and what he has done since joining the starting lineup, he's a fucking star. There's no debate, in my opinion. Tell me something, basketball cognoscente. Are your eyes open? Are you ready to welcome Amen Thompson into the Star Club? That's a terrible song. I got to write out some lyrics for that. Stars Born, fantastic movie, and a star was born in the NBA last night. Amen Thompson's a star. Could Jalen Green still get there? Sure. Could Alperen Sengun still get there? Sure. But we see a lot of players like Jalen Green in the NBA. We've seen a lot of players like him over time. Guys who can get to the bucket, who can score, but who are inconsistent. That's what Green is. I like Green. I feel like his ceiling as an NBA player, he could be Jamal Crawford. He could be the absolute best 6th man off the bench for maybe the Rockets, maybe another team someday. He's young, and I imagine he's still looking at himself and saying, no, I can be way better than that. And yeah, he's 22. I think he turns 23 in a couple of weeks. And he's had some great moments this season. He had a nice little stretch a little bit ago. But the up and the down with him, I feel like there's a lot of players in the league who can do that. Not a ton, but I would say 10, 15 guys that are similar to him and that they can put up points on a consistent basis. And then you got Alperen Sengun, but we all compare Sengun to Nikola Jokic, and I still think that with Sengun, there's room for improvement, specifically from outside. I thought that cut that he had through the lane with 10 seconds to go to give the Rockets a late lead. He showed some impressive footwork there. This is not meant to be a slight against Sengun. Watch out, psychotic Turkish basketball fans. Everything's xenophobic. No. And watch out, Jalen Green stands. Like, this is not meant to be a slight against those two. I just think Amen Thompson, in less than a couple of weeks in the starting lineup, has all of a sudden turned into a star. And, for all the people, myself included, who were upset that the Rockets didn't get the lottery ball so that they could get Victor Wembanyama, hell, you might have stumbled into something just as good for your organization going forward. And again, Wemby obviously has a huge ceiling. He's massive. He can do a lot. He's incredibly skilled for his size. But Amen Thompson might be the most athletic 6'7" person I've ever seen. And I mean, what happens if he develops a shot? What happens if he becomes a better handler? What happens? I don't even know what he's going to be. I just know he can do everything for you. And that's what you're looking for ultimately. If you want to have a championship caliber team, you want a star who can do everything. And it's second effort to them. And you want a guy who's going to coach that player to be the best person he can be. Ime Udoka, we've heard from Amen Thompson earlier this year saying, hey, if he gives up a bucket, that's a fucking failure. I don't think he said fuck, but you get what I'm trying to say here. And remember that moment that he had late in the game where he actually got beat by Jason Tatum, one of the best players in the NBA, to the bucket for the game-tying score right at the end. I bet Ime Udoka got on his ass about that after the game during film sessions. 100%. Because he holds Thompson up to that standard. So to have that kind of coach and this kind of player with that kind of freakish athleticism, he's only going to get better. And this is just 3 weeks in the starting lineup. I see a couple of people in the comments section, and you can join live to watch the Gallant Says podcast on youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant Says on X, at Gallant Says, Instagram at Sports Gallant, facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports, Monday through Friday at around 4 p.m. Central Time. And you're saying he's never going to go back to the bench, right? Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And this is nothing against Jabari Smith Jr., who definitely brings a lot of different things to the table. Size, length, he can stretch the court. But this guy is special. This is buy a jersey special. And that was his first game-winning shot last night. It's unbelievable. So we'll see ultimately what Amen Thompson is at the end of this year. I think right now, though, already he's a star. Let's read some comments here. Noah Hirsch 525 says on Instagram, is it weird to have more trust in Amen Thompson than Jalen Green for the team right now? Nope, not weird at all. Based on how they play and just how much of a dog Amen is, I think Amen is the future. Totally agree. I felt that way a couple of weeks ago. I did not think, though, that it would turn into this. And last night on the road against the Celtics, he was the best player on the court for a large portion of the game. I love Jason Tatum. I love Jaylen Brown. The Celtics are my favorite team. And sure, there was no Derek White in that game, blah, 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 blah. And also Dylan Brooks hit a Rockets record 10 threes in that game. Shout out to Dylan Brooks. Brooks played his ass off. He even had a little Dylan Brooks, Dylan the villain moment where he flopped on a moving screen, and then he started essentially like gyrating at the air as he was down on the ground. Dylan had 36 points last night. Insane. 10 threes. Like, they don't win that game without Dylan Brooks because a lot of the other Rockets played poorly. So maybe you put an asterisk next to the victory to a degree. But Amen Thompson, unbelievable in that game. I'll read some more comments here before we move on to talking about the Houston Texans. Leo asks on Twitter, what team are you more optimistic about, the Rockets or the Texans to win a championship? I think it's more open in the NBA. I really do. Than it ever has been. And the Rockets are way ahead of schedule right now. I think there are some similarities to how we felt about the Texans last year versus how we feel about the Rockets right now. But even with the Texans in 2023, 2024, they were shooting themselves in the foot a lot. It was CJ Stroud just looked awesome, and you thought he had this high ceiling. Now you wonder about what his ceiling is, who they bring in as offensive coordinator, if they're still going to have the same amount of weapons for CJ Stroud this coming season. But right now, I got to say Rockets. And there's definitely some recency bias here. But look at what they've done. Since the beginning of the year, they've beaten Memphis twice. That's the third best team in the Western Conference. They beat the Nuggets. There was no Jokic that game. They were in a back and forth with the Sacramento Kings, who were playing better. They beat the Cavs twice. They beat the Celtics. I mean, this is an incredible start to 2025 to the point where, I mean, even inside the NBA, they've been hyping the shit out of the Rockets. And you can bet that on the next Inside the NBA, which those are Thursdays, right? On the next Inside the NBA, you can bet that there will be some sort of conversation at some point afterwards about the Rockets and Amen Thompson. More comments here. Who should be the starting five come playoff time? Well, that's tricky. There have been some trade rumors. I know someone brought up that De'Aaron Fox could be moved to the Rockets from the Kings. I don't know about that. I really don't. I think the Rockets are going to roll with what they have, and they should roll with what they have into the postseason. I don't think you break this up. I really don't. But I think the real question is about, are you going to put Jabari Smith back in? And I think right now, what you got right now, that's the way to go. Thompson, Brooks, Şengün, Van Vliet, Green. You bring Tari in off the bench. You bring in Jabari in off the bench. Some minutes for Steven Adams. The occasional game for Jason Tate to go energy mode. I think the real question, if you look at the depth, can you do better than Aaron Holiday as your backup point guard? That's really it. Desert Stro says, better believe we'll have my Almond Raw jersey by the time the playoffs begin. Aiden Watson says, Almond for MVP the next 2 to 3 years. World of Warcraft Spartacus says, the NBA is screwed when he masters ball handling. I got to say about the ball handling side of things, that doesn't always come naturally over time. I think you can improve at it, but I think there's a degree to which you can improve at it. But, I mean, he's pretty damn good with it. Brandon Clark says, I think it's a real chance the Rockets will get to the NBA Finals this year. Real chance. Emphasize real chance. Not that it's going to happen. Aiden Watson says, does this make Jabari a trade piece, or he's the sixth man going forward? I think so. He's definitely somebody that you're looking at to potentially trade, because I think Tari Eason is Ime Udoka's guy. He's compared him to Kawhi Leonard. That's very high praise. So I think Tari Eason's always going to be your sixth man. And yeah, I think Jabari has now become expendable, which is good. That's good to have a player like that that's expendable. Chris from Sam Houston says, no minutes for Cam. Yep, you know what? Good point. I totally forgot because he was out sick. This is a tricky thing. You might have too much depth on the bench. Whitmore might be someone you move because Whitmore clearly has a lot of confidence in his ability, and I have nothing wrong. I have no problem with that. But sometimes you got to let the guys go who really want to be a bigger, star caliber player. And I don't know that Cam Whitmore can be that here. But I appreciate Chris from Sam Houston bringing up that obvious forgetting. The Rockets won last night, and the Celtics were missing some guys. There was no Al Horford. There was no, God, am I forgetting? Derek White. And the Celtics are a really deep basketball team. But yeah, the Rockets were without Cam Whitmore and Jabari Smith. And without the great Reed Shepherd, as some are saying. Mobley was out the last 2 games they won against the Cavs too. Jokic was out against the Nuggets. Still excellent wins, Chris from Sam Houston. I agree with you there. That's going to wrap up our Rockets talk for today's show. I did want to bring up the latest when it comes to the Texans offensive coordinator search as well. So, they're going to interview Gerard Johnson at some point this week. I don't think Johnson is likely to get the job. I think the fact that Johnson's never been a play caller before certainly hurts him. I think right now, more than anything, the Texans are going to need a little bit of experience in the offensive coaching room. Which is why it's very interesting that they interviewed this guy. Syracuse football offensive coordinator, Jeff Nixon. I never thought, as someone who went to Syracuse for school, I never thought I would see Syracuse offensive coordinators getting head coaching interviews. And I know that Doug Marrone was the coach of the Jaguars for a little bit, but a Syracuse offensive coordinator of a 10-win Syracuse football team. When I was in school, they were so fucking terrible. First game I went to was Syracuse-Washington on a Friday in 2007, and Washington skull-fucked them up and down the field. It was rough. At least fans showed up for that game. They didn't really show up for any games the rest of our time on campus, even though they did win a bowl game the last year. Jeff Nixon was part of a Syracuse offense that was in the ACC and had, in Kyle McCord, a very talented quarterback transferring from Ohio State into his program. But I think Syracuse did a hell of a job this year, and just take a look at their passing game and what he was able to do with McCord. At the very least, having a conversation with Jeff Nixon, I think, is a win for the Texans. Because I want to pick this guy's brain about getting the ball out quick. Sam Warren of the Houston Chronicle, who also is a Syracuse guy, shout out to Q's, brought up that C.J. Stroud had the 4th highest time to throw in the NFL this year. 2.97 seconds. Kyle McCord, at the college level, was 5th in times to throw, 2.4 seconds. I mean, it's totally different. The NFL versus ACC football. But Syracuse's offense was purring this year. Most of McCord's attempts, per Sam Warren, nearly half were between 0 and 9 yards. They came over the middle, where Stroud has been effective in his NFL career, and they would set up deep shots when Syracuse threw it deep. McCord was one of the best quarterbacks in college football on passes of 20-plus air yards. He was 41 of 78 for 1,273 yards, 9 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. That was what C.J. Stroud was good at once. Stroud was not very good at that this past season. Definitely hurts to not have a good offensive line, have slow developing plays, to have your wide receiver core get injured. There are definitely some reasons as to why the offense took a bit of a step back. McCord faced a lot of pressure in this offense, but Syracuse was throwing a lot. 4 players with 50-plus catches, 5 with 500-plus receiving yards, including one of their running backs. And I look at this McCord offense, and I feel like it could work. I think it's very funny that Sam brought up McCord's 172 pressures in 13 games were the 5th most in the country, a 26.9% pressure rate. C.J. Stroud was pressured 39.4% of his 701 dropbacks this year. That is fucking nuts. That number? So, this Jeff Nixon offense at Syracuse were towards the top of college football in yards after the catch. We're towards the top of college football in third down percentage, towards the top of college football in red zone touchdown percentage. I don't know that Jeff Nixon is going to get the gig. I just think that's a good guy to interview. I still think that the Rams passing game coordinator, Nick Caley, is probably the front runner to be the next Texans offensive coordinator. I say that because he's been interviewed before by the Texans for the offensive coordinator role before they gave it to Bobby Slowik back in 2023. Also, he has ties to Nick Caserio. So it does seem likely, but if I'm the Houston Texans, I'm going to be very careful about who I bring in next as offensive coordinator if he is not somebody who's coached before. I need a past play caller. I need someone with pelts on the wall. If you've watched my live stream, you would have noticed that on Friday, when we talked about Bobby Slowik being fired, that I thought it's rather unlikely that Chip Kelly would give up a very cushy gig at Ohio State to be the Texans' next offensive coordinator. But after a story that Lance Zierlein told on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 in the morning with John Granato on Monday, I feel like it's going to be really important that the Texans bring in somebody who has been there and done that. I don't think you can have somebody who is, I guess, green. Why do I say that? Well, take a listen to this clip from the bench on, what was the day? How did I forget the day already? On Monday, here is Lance Zierlein laying out what he had heard about Bobby Slowik.
I told you guys a story about he and maybe you didn't hear me. He and Bobby Slowik had a run-in before the draft. So what happened was, I'll tell you the whole thing now that Slowik's gone. C.J. Stroud came to visit the Texans, and Bobby Slowik was telling them, okay, they were watching stuff on tape. Now, before I tell you this, when C.J. was at Ohio State, he really didn't talk to the OC at all. That's not his guy. He didn't think he knew ball. This coming from somebody who knows C.J. intimately. He didn't think the offense coordinator was very smart. So he would only talk to Ryan Day. Ryan Day was the guy who had to communicate with C.J., which I didn't love that, honestly, before the draft process. And it played into some of my thoughts on C.J. in terms of coachability.
So, you hear that from Lance. Lance is very connected with NFL draft people. I do not think that Lance made that story up. I don't think he would bring that up. I'm seeing Laura Gar asking that on Instagram. No. Lance is very connected, and the story that we're about to play about his exchange with Bobby Slowik in a moment is something that, one, has been confirmed by some other people online. I saw Texans Cap said that he's heard the same story. It's the first time I'd heard it, but Lance had even brought this up earlier when it came to Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik, which he mentions there. But that first part of the clip where you hear that C.J. Stroud really only talked to Ryan Day and he didn't respect the offensive coordinator, I think that's a reason to make sure that you're bringing in somebody who's a celebrity coordinator. You need somebody who's known. Remember when they interviewed Cliff Kingsbury back in 2023? That's a known offensive coordinator, celebrity coordinator. And Chip Kelly is a celebrity coordinator. Can you lure him away from Ohio State? I don't know. But I think if we know anything about the Texans, these guys spend. They paid out David Culley's contract after they fired him. Did the same thing with Lovie Smith. Hell, they gave Bobby Slowik a raise after last season and then moved on from him. This is a team that I think more than in years past with Bob McNair running the show is willing to accept sunk costs and move on. You got to respect that. You might think Cal's goofy. You might think Hannah's a little bit too hands-on. I've heard some interesting things about the flagship's relationship with the McNairs. But I think that a team that is willing to spend should be respected, assuming they do it somewhat responsibly and stay relatively hands-off. But this is Lance continuing to talk about Bobby Slowik on John and Lance on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. You can catch that show weekday morning 7 to 10. And this is where shit gets juicy talking about Bobby Slowik.
He said he didn't know ball. Ryan Day's my guy. And so I'm going to listen to Ryan Day. And what I heard was that he didn't like his communication was with Ryan Day and not the offense coordinator. Okay.
Again, that goes back to, hey, Stroud, I think Chip Kelly, of all the candidates we've heard, makes the most sense. So spend some money. Throw some money at him. It's a cushy job to leave. He's getting paid around $2 million a year. That's a lot for coordinators. Are you willing to spend more? I would think that you would if you want C.J. Stroud to be the happiest he possibly can be here. And that's not bending over backwards to C.J. Stroud's whims. You shouldn't go that far like with Deshaun Watson and the Texans or like the Rockets and James Harden. But don't you want to bring in somebody who's going to make that guy happy? I think so. More from Lance Zierlein on the bench.
Okay. Well, that's a little strange, but whatever. He comes into Houston. Bobby Slowik is trying to tell him some stuff, and CJ just says, "Oh yeah, I know that we call this, whatever, XY switch, whatever it would be at Ohio State." And apparently, maybe it happened a couple times, and Bobby Slowik just kind of jumped him and said, "I don't give a what you call it Ohio State. That's college. This is pro football." And Bobby kind of got in his face about it, And CJ's not one to back down at all. And CJ, and I don't know if Bobby was testing him or I don't know what the deal was, but CJ jumped up and got back in his face. And it was very contentious. It had to be kind of broken up.
That's something else. Is that something that could happen? Well, let's think about this for a second. Now, you look at Bobby Slowik, you definitely don't believe that, right? Like, Bobby Slowik looks kind of dorky like me, He's a younger-looking guy who isn't that big. Are you really thinking that someone who looks like this, and you can see this on the full screen right now, if you're watching along on YouTube or Twitch or Instagram, Facebook, someone that looks like that, Do you think someone that looks like that is going to get up in any NFL player's face and confront them? It does sound unbelievable at first. It really does. And perhaps I'm being looksist here, but again, just more context. Like, are you really telling me that this guy is getting in CJ Stroud's face? Here's why I think it's possible. And again, this is speculation. But I believe Lance when he tells stories like this. And Lance is not the only person who heard this story. Bobby Slowik is the son of a former coach. I don't know if Bobby Slowik, in fact, if his father is still coaching. But I know that he's told us the story in media availability about his dad, Bob Slowik, who is currently the defensive coordinator for the Calgary Stampeders. Slowik played college football at Michigan Tech. He had 43 catches for 603 yards and 4 touchdowns in 2008. He is more athletic than me. He's more athletic than most people. I consider myself still pretty athletic. Your boy's still playing flag football, though. We'll see how that goes. I joined a team with DJ Bien-Aimé. And I think Sam Warren as well. Some Houston media yokels. We'll see if my ACL spontaneously combusts. Paul, get to the fucking point. Okay. Bobby's played. But Bobby has 2 things working against him as a first-time coordinator. 1, he looks young. 2, he's the son of a former coach. And let's add in a third one. He does not look imposing. He does not look like a traditional football guy. And I think someone that looks like him is constantly self-aware of the fact that he has to overcome the way that he looks. This isn't a white or black thing. This is as an assistant coach who has not done anything in the league and looks young and doesn't exactly look the most imposing, you are regularly going to have to overcome not looking like a traditional football player face. That doesn't roll off the tongue. Perhaps we need to come up with something that's a little bit more snappy, but someone who perhaps is constantly looking at himself in the mirror and realizing, man, how do I establish credibility? Getting in the face of a quarterback during an NFL draft interview, I don't think it's that far-fetched. This is a guy who just got this gig, and he's trying to show that he's got that alpha energy, you know? So as a young coach, you're probably trying different styles with everybody. And in an interview, this is one of the first interviews he probably did. He's talking to a quarterback, and the guy's saying about this is how we do X, Y, Z at Ohio State. And let's be honest, Ohio State people are fucking annoying, right? They're fucking annoying. Oh, Ohio State this, Ohio State that, the Ohio State. Shut the fuck up, right? Like, they get annoying. So if you're an NFL coach and you're hearing him talk about all this, and you're a first-time coordinator, and CJ Stroud clearly has an idea of who's a good coach and who isn't a good coach, you might be challenging one another in this meeting. I don't think it's that far-fetched for Bobby Slowik to get up in his face and for CJ Stroud to do the same thing. What are the specific details of that exchange? We're never going to know. We're only going to get that from Lance, but somebody else has supposedly heard that. And I got to say, that's not even the craziest story that I've heard about Bobby Slowik this week. The other story, it's something I heard secondhand, and I don't want to spill it because it's one of those things where I don't know, but Lance telling that story, I think you should believe him. I really do. That's my guy. Oh, Paul, you're biased, blah, 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 blah. He works at your station. Yeah, but also, I mean, he's a trusted NFL draft person. He talks with people, and let's be honest, in any profession, there's a lot of gossip that goes on behind the scenes. I am sure that Lance heard that story. I'm sure that others have heard that story. Lance just happens to host a sports talk show in a city that information would be pertinent and also easy to discuss once the coach gets fired. And I know that's a little bit of a frustrating element of the piling on after someone gets fired in any sport. Like you're stabbing a dead cadaver to death that's already been dead. It's the beating of a dead horse. But generally, these stories don't come out because you don't want to risk losing access, but you also don't want to risk potential lawsuits and things like that. Again, does that happen often? No, but behind the scenes stories like that, if someone shares a story like that with you and you talk with that person on a regular basis, that person is going to be unlikely to continue to share those stories with you. This is a part of journalism that it's annoying because it's a relationship thing. And the flow of information is generally controlled by, like, is it going to go to somebody that you don't trust? Probably not. Is it going to go to someone you trust? Yes, because you hope that person's going to keep it to themselves. We've got a lot of chatty Cathys in this industry, and some of them blab to anyone who will listen to these rumors. And you know what? Some of those rumors are fucking entertaining, and I feel like they should be shared amongst friends. But I think it's certainly plausible that that interaction with CJ Stroud and Bobby Slowik happened. Anyway, let's continue listening to Lance with John Granado on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 talking about Bobby Slowik and his back and forth with CJ Stroud.
And so when CJ went to his next draft meeting, and I talked to the team where CJ went. He went to his next.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring.
John, damn it! Why do we have to have a Coors Light commercial in the middle of this? Am I gonna get dinged for that? More from Lance Zierlein.
Next draft meeting, and because I asked this team, hey, did you hear anything about this with CJ Stroud? And they said, oh, we asked CJ how his last visit went, which was Houston. And he said, terrible. I don't think I'll be going there. And people who train, like CJ's whole crew, did not want him to go to Houston. And they didn't think he was going to Houston because it was he and Bobby got into it. And then CJ was drafted by Houston, which that's one of the reasons I was really surprised. Like I kind of wrote, after finding that out, I wrote CJ off from the Texans, and I thought, okay, this is Will Anderson for sure. And so when they traded for him, I was very surprised because I knew there was that lingering stuff there. But then in discussing all of it last year, I heard it was squashed. Like there was no issue. Bobby and him were good. So I didn't think it was any kind of a deal anymore. But I do wonder, based on the Ohio State stuff with his OC there, based on his pre-dust up, I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think CJ just didn't. I just don't think he liked Bobby Slowik as a play coach. And I will say, one other person that I talked to, the same one who knew a little something about the relationship between Slowik and CJ, said, in his opinion, based on what he knows about Bobby Slowik, he's a by-the-book coordinator, but he doesn't really have the same feel for the Shanahan scheme that maybe some other coordinators have.
That was interesting to hear. I'm going to let Lance wrap up his thoughts there, but I saw a couple of people pushing, hey, you know what? Maybe it's time the Texans offense goes away entirely from the Shanahan system, the Kubiak system, maybe towards McVay or something like that, or maybe something completely different. Could that be Chip Kelly? Is that Jeff Nixon from Syracuse? I don't know. I really don't. But I feel like the same old, there's clearly there's been a comeuppance in the NFL over the last couple of years for specifically those Shanahan offenses. Doesn't it feel like everyone's running the same shit defensively? There's so much cover two being done, and people who are willing to dink and dunk now have to deal with the whole, oh, wait, what if I can only get 2 to 3 yards of reception or something like that? What happens when I get in the red zone? What happens if I can't run the ball? I think that's been one of the issues the Shanahan offense has run into, where McVay, again, similar trees, Shanahan and McVay, but McVay has gone in a different direction, and the McVay guys, like, they adapt, blah, 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 blah. Again, I don't know who or who won't be a good coordinator. Really, you can make predictions. They're educated guesses. But I do think it is worth considering, especially considering you just had somebody that was part of the Shanahan coaching tree looking at another kind of offense. More from Lance to wrap up.
Which could lead into CJ, who knows ball. I mean, CJ knows ball. It could be where CJ's like, I just don't feel comfortable with this.
And I feel like if he's going to be comfortable with anyone, he's going to be comfortable with Chip Kelly. If he's going to be comfortable with anyone, I think it's going to be Chip Kelly. Celebrity coordinator. And on top of that, pelts on the wall, Ohio State connection. I mean, there's a lot for CJ to like it. And it's not about what CJ likes necessarily, but you want someone where he's going to, from the get-go, listen. Just based off of what Lance said there. I have no issue with the quarterback thinking that he knows everything. No issue with that. As long as that guy, when he is challenged, is willing to listen from time to time. Tom Brady's relationship with Bill Belichick was one of those where they both pushed each other. Sometimes the player knows what he's talking about. And I do think, just given some of the things that we've heard Stroud reference over his, press conferences and stuff like that, I actually do think Stroud knows ball. I think he's a smart player. But I think there were very few things that he could do this year behind that offensive line that had no ability to pick up stunts, and an offense that I felt did not understand the best way to regularly do things that worked over and over again from different looks. Let's read some comments here talking about CJ Stroud, and on top of that, talking about that Bobby Slowik story. In case you don't know, see this chat box to the right? I'm trying to tinker with the size, and hopefully you guys can see each other's conversations with each other, but you should be able to interact with one another in a cross-platform way, whether you're on Twitch, at Gallant says, or YouTube, at Paul Gallant. I generally think the best experience as far as being able to interact with the show is on YouTube and on Twitch. You can also do it on X. You can do it on Instagram and on Facebook. If you want to cut the line and interrupt me mid-thought and to get me to play this button of former Texans offensive lineman Wade Smith,
Paul, stop talking. Listen.
I will do that if you super chat. Paul, you're just trying to take money from us. Yes. Yes. I'm not trying to take money from you in the same way that Jake Asman's trying to rip off Jets fans, those poor crack addicts of a fan base with those shitty Aaron Glenn shirts that he was putting out there. Went on a rant about that today on ESPN 97.5, 92.5. I love Jake, but God damn it, Jake. Those shirts are artistically disgusting. I would not be caught dead near one of those shirts, let alone wearing it, and that's not just because of the New York Jets Association. Anyway, let's address some of these comments here. Frobry, this is back to our conversation about Amon Thompson at the beginning. Dylan Brooks, eventually leaves. Jabari Smith is a starter again. Cam is a clear piece you trade with picks. I think you want to keep Dylan Brooks around. I like that Dylan Brooks has got that dog. I think you got to have some veteran players, some veteran presence on this roster. I like Jabari Smith. I really do. But could you get a better point guard with Jabari Smith? I don't know. World of Warcraft Spartacus brings up that the Texans announced they interviewed Thad Lewis, who's the Bucs quarterback coach. So they're really bringing in a lot of people, and I think they should bring in a lot of people. The more ideas, the better. It is the creme de la creme of offensive coordinator gigs. You have a team that has a great defense. You have a team that has a young quarterback with weapons. It's really the offensive line that's the issue. I do think Cole Popovich could be back based off of what I'm hearing. More comments here. Neil Shidiak on YouTube says, I bet CJ did get into it with Bobby Slowik. You can just tell Bobby's a dick like that. I'm not going to go that far. I really can't tell. All I know is I was very annoyed that one time that Bobby Slowik said, football is football, when being asked about some of the struggles that the Texans were having offensively. G asks on YouTube, maybe a dumb question, but if it's true, why at the pro level do coaches do this? Pee-wee, high school, college? Sure. Talking to a grown man worth millions like he's a kid seems counterproductive. It might be counterproductive at college too. I really feel there was a chance that the Texans were going into the draft saying, we don't love any of these quarterbacks. We have the number 2 overall pick, and we're probably going to get Will Anderson. And I think that Texans ownership perhaps put pressure on Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans to say, listen, you can get Will Anderson if you want. You're also getting a quarterback. Because I think that Texans fans were listening to the outside noise here in town. They realized that this fan base had largely became ambivalent to the Texans. Like they people were stopping caring. They used to be so arrogant about people always will care about the Texans in town, which is funny. I mean, they're a new franchise, and there's an entire group of people around my age who didn't have an NFL team for a few years, who don't really give a shit about the NFL. And I think they realized, yeah, we're not going to be excited going into next year unless you get a quarterback. And they just happened to take the right guy. But I think that the ownership is part of the reason that Slowik's out. I think they helped push him out. I think they probably said, listen, no one likes Bobby Slowik. Let's move on. More comments here. Texans for Life says Thompson's that dude. NBA Finals prediction from Toro McJohnson. Rockets, Celtics, Rockets in 6. Good luck. Brandon Halam says, is it bullshit o'clock? Are you referring to this Bobby Slowik story? Matthew A says, why don't people want to believe this? It is strange. I don't understand why people are pushing back against it. And there were a couple of people that were pushing back on the idea that CJ and Bobby got into it. It is really weird to imagine Bobby Slowik getting in an actual football player's face over terminology of all things. But is it really that crazy? The idea that a young coach who probably feels like he's a bit of a Nepo baby in a coordinator role for the first time, who's probably trying to figure out what styles work for him and what styles don't now that he's in an elevated coaching position, who also happens to look the way Bobby Slowik does. Can't you envision a guy like saying, like trying to lay down the law and flex a little bit? And I'm sure they had a conversation and they buried the hatchet. It sounds like that was the case based off of what Lance said. But I think as CJ continued to work with Bobby, he got frustrated. But yeah, I see my guy Brown Chubby Bear VT on X said filed under things that never happened. I trust Lance on this one, and a lot of people believe that this didn't happen. Murray said unhinged if true on X. The only explanation is it never happened. Mito Magic says it just doesn't sound true. I'll believe it for now, but I'll also take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, this is something that Lance has reported on before. Frankie, for real, this cap. Find it hard to believe. Laceville89 says, bro, that was nasty work what Lance said. It was either true or not. You don't expose a team like that. That shit was weak. No, we do. We don't work for the team. And it's, I think, an amusing anecdote, especially given that the guy's now gone. All right, one last thing. So it does not seem like the Astros are going to use the now official. My cat's in the background making a ruckus. Aria, you knocked over my picture of Larry Bird that I took off the wall. This is for those who missed this earlier. I grew up a Celtics fan. I'm from Boston originally. That is a picture of me before my first ever sporting event with Celtics legend Larry Bird. Someone at the Boston Garden had this picture blown up and autographed. And he said to me before my first ever Celtics game, a Celtics Hornets game in 1996, he asked me, you gonna scream a cheer, Paul? Very cool of him to autograph. And as someone who was famously very unapproachable, mad props to my dad, who I love, and gave me so many amazing going to sporting event experiences growing up, all these Patriots games we went to, those Celtics games too, having the balls to go up to a famously unapproachable Larry Bird and say, hey, my son's a huge fan of yours. And I just watched a VHS cassette of him, I think like 2 weeks before, and I was obsessed. With Larry Bird, who had just retired. His back gave out on him. But my cat just knocked that over. Bringing it back to the Astros. So they move on from Ryan Presley. They get about $8.5 million in salary cap relief. We heard from Astros general manager Dana Brown today. and Dana said, hey, yeah, Ryan Presley was kind of out on us when we signed Josh Hader. You could say that. Ryan Presley, I think, from what I understand, Ryan Presley was incensed with Dana Brown's existence for much of the first half of the year. But to Presley's credit, I thought he handled his demotion with a lot of grace. He still was I think, stand-up teammate, and he's a huge part of the Astros winning the World Series in 2022. And I don't like the way that the Astros seemingly shamed him into waiving his no-trade clause when I'm assuming he did not want to leave for Chicago. When I'm assuming he did not want to leave for Detroit either, because he did not waive his no-trade clause for that deal with Detroit. I'm assuming that Detroit deal. I'm assuming that Detroit deal was a sweeter offer than what the Astros ultimately got for Presley, which was a single-A 20-year-old pitcher and the salary relief. But I'm so bummed out that instead of Alex Bregman, where it seems like the Astros are not going to give much more of an offer to Bregman, who's still holding at that 6 years, $156 million deal. I am bummed out that it seems like they have shifted their focus from Bregman to guys like Jorge Polanco. Jorge Polanco was an infielder for the Seattle Mariners. I don't know how many people are familiar with the website Baseball Savant, but this is the website that we looked at. We who were wondering whether or not Jose Abreu still had it. And here is his metrics. And you can see it right now if you're watching along on YouTube and on Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter. Polanco is 31. He is primarily a second baseman coming off of a season where he hit .213 but with 16 home runs at T-Mobile Park in Seattle, which is a very bad hitter's park. But I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I think I can zoom in, can I? Let's see. Look at this. As far as his batting percentiles, we're talking not very good. As far as his fielding ability, we're talking even worse. Do the Astros really need to add another infielder? Don't they need a bat? Don't they need an outfielder? So this is, I guess, who they're targeting. And I don't get it. I really don't. Unless they think that Altuve is at the point now where he can no longer play second base. But considering where the Astros were going into the weekend, where it really felt like they were shaming Ryan Presley into taking a trade to Chicago because they were doing all this reporting with Bob Nightingale about how, hey, this salary relief that Presley could provide could allow for the Astros to get Bregman back. Like, and that the deal with Presley will be linked to a future deal with Bregman. I feel like the Astros put that out there and they used Bob Nightingale as a, no offense to Bob, useful idiot there because they realized, okay, we win both ways here. If Ryan Presley doesn't waive his no trade clause for a trade elsewhere, we can point at Ryan Presley as the guy who prevented us from bringing back Alex Bregman. And if he does waive his no trade clause, we save money. Either way, we're either under the collective balance tax or we have a fall guy to blame instead of ourselves for not bringing Alex Bregman back. So to go from over the weekend with the implication from baseball reporters that moving on from Ryan Presley would mean that the Astros have more money to bring back Alex Bregman to, over the last couple of days, seeing the Astros basically just hold, it's disappointing. Does that mean that Bregman is off the table? I don't know. I imagine he's still on the table, but a lot of the reporting's been they're probably out. I don't think that they're going to offer anything more. And I think right now they're hoping that Scott Boras, who seemingly is the one that's initiating communications with Dana Brown, is going to be the one that needs to make this happen, he's going to have to ask for less or something that's a little more Astros friendly. And I don't know that he's going to do that because he's got a reputation to uphold. And I think there's a lot of people arguing right now, just given the way that baseball's offseason's gone the last couple of years, that Scott Boras isn't exactly what he used to be. You know, my old co-host, my current co-host, Joe said that he believes Scott Boras is washed early on this year. And like, I don't disagree with him on that front. He kind of looks washed. He's not getting the same deals he used to. And I get Juan Soto, but Juan Soto's he should be able to get paid for Juan Soto. Anyway, Matthew A. Bro, you rule. Thank you for the super chat. He says, this is for the great stream, picture, and information. I feel like the Astros might be going backwards, LOL. I hope not. I really hope not. But I appreciate that, Matthew, so much. We're going to keep on doing this every single day at around 4 o'clock Central Time. I'll try to be better with the start time tomorrow. I'm still trying to figure out how to best go from doing the radio show to doing this show, given that I have about an hour in between both, and to be as prepped as I need to be for it. I'm realizing I'm doing a little bit too much prep, humble brag, for the radio show and this show too. Like, I'm doing a little bit too much digging for audio and clips, and I'm finding out when I play these audio and clips, I'm getting demonetized as soon as I put it up there, which not great for me considering I'm doing this one on the side. But we're going to try to do a little bit more Ask Me Anything towards the end. We're going to be doing, as we get further and further away from football season, some pop culture talk, some politics talk. It's going to be fun. But I appreciate everybody who stopped by today. I salute you. Matthew A. says, I totally didn't press the button. That's true.
Paul, stop talking. Listen.
My bad. We're still figuring this out, okay? I have a soundboard, and I have all sorts of fun little sound effects here, like this one. I've got this one for making cheesy transitions like at CSI Miami. Benny Rainbow, thank you for bringing rainbows into the chat on Instagram. What's up, brother? Also, I have this one that I can use. This is from my first ever day reporting where I asked Ozzie Guillen this question. Do you feel like the backlash to saying you love Fidel Castro has cooled down back in Miami?
You fucking grow up, motherfucker. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, Ozzie Guillen told me that. Then he told me nice try afterwards. He actually was pretty nice about it, and I thought it was funny. But a lot of people got outraged for me and at me over that question that I asked. Also, there's this from me talking about politics once.
My team's the Republican team. Go team. My team's the liberal team. Go liberals.
I think that's Landry Locker cackling in the background from a tall boy. Wednesday? I don't know. He used to come on my night show from time to time for like a segment a week. Anyway, guys, I really appreciate y'all stopping by. If you haven't already, please like this video on YouTube and subscribe on YouTube, or just subscribe to my Twitch channel. You can also follow me on Twitter at Gallant Says, on Instagram at Sports Gallant, on TikTok at Gallant Says. We got to talk about a post that went mega viral. The biggest post I've ever had in my life. Shit on Travis Kelce's ex, who will never shut the fuck up about him. You can also get it on Facebook, facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. It is Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Central Time, and occasionally after major Houston sporting events. It's also available wherever you get your podcasts after the fact, Apple, Spotify, and on SoundCloud. If you are more of a podcast person, yes, it does come to you free in that form, completely uncensored. If you haven't already, please subscribe on Apple or Spotify. Leave a rating. 5 stars, please. Leave a review. Hell, if you roast me, I'll probably read it on the next show. Until tomorrow at 4 o'clock, so long, farewell. Have yourselves a wonderful Tuesday, and you'll hear me again on the radio